on the blue.
So intense. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
So here's the sort of technical details, how big they're going to be, which I won't go into now. That's more for if you think you're going to make one. But you can see it's quite interesting, the diagram on that slide, because on the left is what we're most likely to see if we're looking at swift nests, is just that little hole. But you can see in the picture on the right, the sumptuous apartments have been made for the swifts, and various little details like grips so that they can hang on well, and that the entrance tunnel is nice and sheltered. And then you can see in the middle a basic construction of an external one. I don't know, Gemma, is there anything you want to add at this point?
I don't think so. No, I think you've covered it all brilliantly. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Katie. On to the next one. Yeah, so there's pros and cons, and you can see just by glancing at ticks and crosses that obviously the integral ticks far many boxes. I mean, as one of the most important things is the occupancy. It does, I gather, it seems that Swifts much prefer the integral ones to the outside ones. And of course, so that's a key thing, because it's no good toiling away making things that they don't like. So obviously, where possible, the integral boxes are far better. But of course, they are more expensive. And then I think this doesn't mean that one should reject the ideas of the externals, because there's heaps and heaps and heaps of opportunities where you could put an external one, but there's never going to, there's not a new build, and there's not going to be a restoration or anything. So although there are some disadvantages, as you can see, like shorter lifespan, you need to keep an eye on them, and you have to be very careful about where you put them. Nevertheless, I think the message is not, well, let's not bother with the external ones. But certainly the other message is we really do need a good effort to try and spread the word for new builds and for restorations to try and include the integral bricks. Thanks, Katie. And just to finish off, there's some Swift towers is another option, of course. And as you can see from this beautiful slide that Gemma's put together, there's just like the sky's the limit. Sorry, that's almost a ghastly pun. But anyway, the kind of different designs are astonishing. There's one in Oxford, I've read. There's one in Belfast bus station. There are opportunities for adapting existing things like defunct concrete water towers. So I think reading about them, I think in a way their best point is as a PR exercise, because certainly the occupancy rate so far has not been that great in Britain, although it does seem to be better, I gather, in Europe, in places like Poland. Maybe it's just a question of them getting used to it. But Swift towers are another option, but of course they are expensive, but it can be a lovely community project, and that by itself would make it a worthwhile thing. And I think that one, the bottom middle, that little box on a pole, I think that's the one in Belfast bus station. So I love the idea that a bus station would have a Swift tower. That's something to make us smile this week. So I think, I don't know, is there anything you'd like to add, Gemma? I think that's us.
No, I think you've covered it all brilliantly. I think, yeah, that was my sort of question as well about the Swift towers. Are they, do the Swifts actually occupy them? Are they as good as sort of the integral bricks and houses? It's just an interesting question.
Yeah, as B said, oh sorry, John, do you want to say?
Well, just one top right was Cambridge, I think, on the outskirts of Cambridge, and I think the finding is that it has not been, well, successful, let's say, really, But as you have said, more a publicity exercise than perhaps something that will be very readily taken up, but perhaps more successful elsewhere, as you've mentioned also. Yes.
Thank you, John. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, like you both said, it's had variable reactions and responses to it. And obviously with anything of studying ecology, it's always like there's so many other factors that might be at play. So it is hard to tell really. But yeah, as you're all saying as well, the kind of raising awareness of it as well is really brilliant. Time. It costs a lot of money, basically, Claudia. Yeah, like it costs loads of money. Like 10,000 for some of those ones in the example. And then I guess if you have permission on the land, like Barrett's own the land, so they want to put it there. And then we also need to keep in mind, like, are there locally nesting swifts? Like, is there point in putting it here at all, kind of thing? Yeah. Ian?
Just to flag, one of the potential benefits is that, I mean, that one in the top left looks, at least to my eye, nice. And it offers the opportunity to put things into parkland, where if we're talking about building-based things, either for integral bricks or things to hang on it, you know, that puts us right in the city space. And there might be a few parks. Again, I accept these aren't as good, but it offers some opportunities in, different environments than built-up ones.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gemma and B. Just to be aware as well that I gave everybody an amount of time, so if you can stick to it as much as possible, just so we're not here all night, even though there's not much else to do. But yeah, so next.
Hi, it's
Jazz.
me and Alba.
Yeah.
So, so we're going to talk through responding effectively to planning consultations. So writing the letters that you'll put into the planning portal. So setting out the basics of the letter. So setting out formally with like a date and address, making sure the case reference is really clear, and that you're aware of any deadlines for the comments that you make. If you need an extension, you can ask for these, but make sure you have a good reason, but there's no harm in asking for an extension. If you've got quite a lot to say, a summary is really useful to just get your point across really quickly to the case officer that's been reading it. Make sure that your letter's to the point. So state on early on if you object or support the proposals, but also it can be useful to sort of set out how you want to set out the letter. So write some bullet points on what you want to achieve from each paragraph so that it becomes a really concise argument, so that the case officer really quickly gets across the message that you're trying to make. Stick to the case in hand, so make sure that you understand the case and the proposals and the type of applications. So there's a big difference between planning permission in principle and full planning applications, and you can find out more about this online. And stick to the case proposals. So if you've got a particular issue with a certain developer or something, don't bring it into the letter, just focus on the proposals. And if you have any issues with the planning process itself, you could address these through the proper channels, through the council website and not through the letter. And finally, for me anyway, the evidence is your friend, so make sure that you do some research and find some really good references to back up your argument. Edinburgh's local development plan is available on the council website, and it's also a really good place to look and see what policies might support your case, and include these, and also links to the evidence that you have, so that the case officer can look these up, and it will show that they're a really legitimate source of evidence. So I'm going to pass on to Alba now, who will take you through the next few points.
Hi, I'm sorry if it's hard to see or hear me. My Wi-Fi is struggling.
That's okay, we can hear you.
So this is how. Okay. This is how to present reasonable solutions to the problem at hand. So how to present your objection. So the decision could not work out the way that you want. So consider what you can actually negotiate, what conditions you can place on the planning permission to reduce concerns. And all of that should be at the end of the appeal. To the next one. So you want to make sure to work together. So you want less individually responses are better than a bunch of responses all from the same formatted letter, because it shows individual and stronger commitment to the cause. It's better for the responses to be from within Edinburgh instead of within like all of Scotland. And then it is making contact with wildlife groups like RSVP can be helpful, because either they can help directly or they can provide support and guidance on how you can help. So the last thing you want to do is make sure that you're following it through. If a planning officer is not delegated, so sometimes a planning officer is delegated to make a decision on the case, in which case you cannot appear in person. But if a planning officer is not delegated, if you can appear in person, if you can plan beforehand, nominate one person to speak and keep the speech short. If the application is refused, you can still appeal and follow the case through.
So
I think there's one more slide. I think it's just a summary.
yeah, summary slide.
So that's just a summary.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jazz and Alba. Okay, so maybe if we keep the questions to the end of the casework section, so keep them in mind if you have any. Next, we have Laura and Kate, I think.
Okay, so I'm going to look at the different letter templates and the similarities and differences between these. And there's 3 different letter templates to choose from, depending on whether swifts are already nesting, or whether, or depending whether the building work is major or minor. All the letter templates highlight relevant legislation. They all suggest a solution to help swifts, and they all explain what the issue is and why swifts are important as well. So the next slide, please. So the first letter template is the one to be used if swifts are already present at a major development. And this is the type of development that would have the biggest impact on swift habitat. And the key difference between this letter and the others is that it's an objection to planning consent being granted. And like all the letter templates, there's sections highlighted in yellow where you can fill in required information, such as the planning application details. So you don't necessarily have to write a lot of new content. You can just fill in the parts that are relevant to that particular application. So the next one, letter template 2, that's to be used where there's potential to encourage swifts to nest. So it's a comment on a planning application rather than an objection as such, and it's the one to be used where there's an opportunity rather than a threat to swifts. And then letter template number 3, this one's to be used where swifts might be disturbed by building work. And like the second letter template, it's a comment rather than an objection, and it recommends particular time of year to carry out work while swifts are away for the winter to minimise disturbance to their nests. So the next slide, this shows a decision tree to help decide which letter template to use. And I was going to very quickly work through an example to show how it can be put into practice. So the next slide, this shows an application from the planning portal for new flats in Gorgie, and it's a major development. But on the next slide, you'll see the very first thing you have to work out is, sorry, the next slide, please, sorry, is whether or not swifts are present. So on the planning portal, you can see from the map, you can match this up against SwiftMapper, and you can put in the postcode of the development and see if any nests have been recorded. And in this case, there's two sightings of swifts, but they're not actually nests and they're not directly on the site. So it shows they're in the area, so there's potential for them. But you would use letter template 2 in this instance, because although it's a major development, you're not kind of putting existing swifts at risk. So there we go, on to Laura.
Thanks, Catherine, it's brilliant.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. So yeah, this session kind of links back, I guess, to a bit what Jazz and Alba were talking about the letters. So I'm just going to sort of highlight some of the key features of a good letter, and I'll do that by taking through some examples of good and bad letter writing. So if you just go to the next slide, please, Katie. So obviously the first thing, a good letter is going to be easy to read. And often you can get a sense of how easy a letter is to read without even starting to read it. So for example, the top example there, you've got a big block of text is taking up most of the page. There's very little white space in there, and you can also see words kind of done the underlining of some spelling and grammar errors. And if you compare that with the example underneath, you can see the text is a lot more broken up. There's paragraphs in there, different headings, bullet points and things, a lot more white space. And I think that's the sort of thing that most people would find much easier to read. And if we go on to the next slide, so the letter should also be clearly targeted. So in the first example, we can see that the letter is addressed to the CEO of the council, who's probably not the person who's going to be making the planning decision there. Also, the development itself isn't clearly referenced there. It's not obvious that the person who's reading that letter is going to know what the plans for the field across the road are. And also it mentions that the decision's being made tonight. So even if it gets to the right person, it's likely that it'll be too late. And again, we can contrast this with a good example where the letter's addressed to a specific contact in the planning department, and it's also got a specific reference to the development that's taking place, so the person reading it will immediately know which development is being spoken about. So if we go to the next slide, please. Yeah, it's also important that there's a logical layout, and so the reader can easily follow the arguments that are being made. So in this case, in our bad example, we've just got a paragraph of text here where the writer's jumping from one idea to another, talking about the person making the applications, house and cars, and then jumping on to whether there's too many developments and the wildlife, and everything's kind of mixed up. And there's no real logical progression of the argument. And if you compare that with the second one, you can see that they've clearly written that they're objecting, the reason that they're objecting, and then it goes on with a reasoned justification, which just makes it much easier to follow and a much more logical progression. So then if we go to the next slide, obviously the content's a key part of the letter, and so that needs to be factual and it needs to be relevant. So again, we've got our first example where the letter writer is talking about basically criticizing the person making the application, making all kinds of irrelevant and personal remarks. It's really quite inappropriate and judgmental. There is some kind of discussion about wildlife in the area, but it's quite superficial. It doesn't really link back to the development. Just kind of relies on strange anecdotes about something that happened in 1988 and listing different animals that they've seen in the area. Whereas by contrast, the second example contains the relevant information and it's also backed up by evidence. So for example, they've enclosed the contents of a wildlife survey, and then they're specifically linking this back to the development. So talking about the footbridge that's enclosed in the plans, and the lack of green space. So it's all clearly backed up by evidence and really linked to the development as well. And so then the next one, please, Katie. So finally, the letter should have a helpful and clear conclusion. So the first example, again, there's not really any conclusion here. It's just save our village, save our environment, save our wildlife, and then some sort of statements in the PS that come across as a a bit sort of aggressive and threatening that they're going to come down to the meeting tonight. And again, you can contrast that with the good example where the letter writers proposed possible solutions or mitigations that would improve the planning proposal, and they're also asking at the end to be kept informed of the outcome. So that's obviously a much better conclusion. And then last slide, please, Katie. So yeah, this is just basically a summary of what I've been through, kind of highlighting the key features of a good letter. So I won't go through them again in the interest of time.
Thank you, Laura. That was really clear as well. Really, really brilliant. Thank you everyone so far. I think I started off doing casework letters like the first type, and it was more coming out of like, why are you destroying everything? So yeah, I think they get more listened to when they look a lot like the second type. And we're going to hear from our resident expert on Swift casework, who's going to give us some examples of nest bricks that have been installed in Edinburgh. So John, if you're ready, I can just click through the slides, so you just tell me next.
Okay, right, yes, well, let's move on to the next one then. Now, first of all, attributable to a former biodiversity officer, Malcolm Fraser, Oxgangs Avenue. In this view, you may just see some Swift bricks installed at the top of the building there. So if we move on to the next, we can see them more clearly there, Ipstock bricks installed. When I visited there, I saw a spanner going into one box. Next, also attributable to Martin Fraser, Turbag School in Portobello, facing north, very near the sea. Swift bricks installed. Yes, next. Right, so since 2004, I have commented on planning applications, this is a bride development in Slateford Road, consent given in 2004, development completed in 2007, where there are Swift bricks, Swift sites installed. Next, please. In this case, entry from below into the building. One example here you can see in the center. There are other similar sites there. So that was the first case in which I commented in Slateford Road. Next. And Springside and Fountain Bridge. There are some private areas there, and tried to find out where Swift bricks had been installed according to the planning condition. I should say, first of all, the council in consent letters made Swift brick installation a condition. In 2011, it was changed to an informative because of a number of conditions that planning officers have to monitor. It relied from then on the goodwill of developers. Now, I was in contact with the architect in this case, and he said there were some Swift bricks in private areas, and he would send illustrations of these, but that never came. But if we move on to the next, please, we can, next, yes, we can see facing the West Approach Road, two Swift bricks installed there in that development in Fountain Bridge. Next, and in Craigmillar, Collier Place, the first stage of a park development there, Swift bricks installed, and more. Next slide, please, we can see them more closely there. One thing I would say, in further action, I think, and going back to illustrations, very useful illustrations earlier, the closer any bricks can be to the eaves of the building, the better, where there's some kind of canopy. That's one thing I think where it would be the case to work with a knowledge of where informatives have been inserted in consent letters, to work then with developers on the location of where Swift bricks are installed. Okay, well, let's leave that just now. Move on to the next one then, please. In Gorgie Road, near to where it was mentioned earlier on, 347 Gorgie Road, a student development there, I think. We may just manage to see them, not very clear there, but if we move on to the next, a closer view of Swift bricks installed there, facing east on the south side of Gorgie Road at Robertson Avenue, I think it is, Gorgie Park, close down that area. Next, and in Broughton, a developer who was in contact with Biodiversity Council to make sure it was being done in the best way possible. Watkin Jones, I think you'll manage to see Swift bricks installed there to the left and right of that development. I think unfortunately tree growth has increased there, which if that was cut back would make it better. But if we move on to the next, in September I think it was 2012, we can see blue tits showing an interest in these bricks. Well, they won't attract any swifts in September, but nevertheless, if other species are showing an interest in swift bricks, it may attract swifts to these sites. In earlier years, I certainly did see swifts in the Broughton area, as in most areas, a decline, I think, in numbers has occurred in recent years. But so again, I'm not aware of any of these sites being taken up. It will take a long time, but if anyone wants to go on and play the Swift Call CD to attract swifts there, fair enough. Okay, next, please. Another example of a developer or architect showing an interest in what they were asked to do. Top right there, you will see Ipstock Swift bricks to be, well, what are they expected to be installed there, shown on that drawing. And if we move on to the next one, we can see that building there. And again, a cluster view, please, next. The Swift bricks there, Salamander Place in Leith, facing north. An area which I think is changing from an industrial area to a more residential and perhaps with some greenery, more wildlife friendly area. Right, next. Now, one I think I missed myself, but attributable to Julie Dewar, Senior Planning Initiatives, was an interest in Biodiversity Council. North 4th Street, terraces of fairly low housing there, not as high as Swift might expect. In this view, I think you can see some Swift bricks along the top there. I think the street that is now called John Paul Jones View or something like that. But if we move on to the next one, a closer view of a brick installed there. And that's how the stock bricks are supposed to be installed, with entrance to the lower part of the brick there, and a good location there under a canopy. And that is something that I think Swifts look for protection from any predators, as was suggested earlier, rather than low down in the building. But if find the next one, please. A brick installed in a different way. So bricks have been installed in both ways in that development. Both will work, I think, no problem, I think, there. But that certainly is one where, again, I've seen Swifts in that area, North 4th Street in Leith. So again, we can hope for take up in due course. So there are these examples of Swift bricks installed, responsive to comments which I've made, and as I say, in the last case there, Julie Dewar in the council also made. But let us take into account it's not relevant only to new developments. The Biodiversity Action Plan states it's relevant to all the properties too, renovation, restoration of buildings. And in making some recent comments, I've drawn attention to that. So more action on that is required too, I would say. So there we are.
Thank you so much, John.
I mean, again, it can take a long time between a consent given and a development coming about. Now, what I have to do, and no problem in others making comments too, as we've seen recommended. First, I did do it by letter, but then in agreement with Julie Dewar and Caroline Peacock and Biodiversity in the Council, I drew possible sites to their attention for their action between about 2016 and 2020. But as a change of approach, Julie Dewar recommended early last year that it would help if I also made online comment. So since then, I've made online comment on applications. So I would draw to your attention, rather than any laborious letter, if you want to write a simple letter, that's fine, but you can make online comment on applications. So just a few phrases will suffice to draw it to the attention of the planning officer. So the need to find out when from my own point of view, in having made comments, I need to go back and find out where decisions are pending, and then if informative stuff have been inserted, I need to start, when we're out to move about again a bit more, need to go around and what's actually happened, because I would have to say also there have been cases where no action has been taken, but I tried to find out what the position was. The story was, oh, the architect has gone away, a new architect knows nothing about it. So that has happened too. Digital primary school, for example, that was one case where there was a recommendation to install Swift bricks, but from what I could see, nothing had happened. So more people involved, fine. Yes, indeed. The more the merrier in terms of interest in pursuing the subject. Okay, thanks very much, Katie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, John. It's really useful to have your knowledge and experience. We are, just to jump a little bit ahead, we are going to have a casework meeting for people that want to do casework specifically. And this was to kind of like let everybody know what the process was so that you can communicate it to other people and also for you to know. But we will go through it and use more specific examples. It was really great that Catherine used an example already, but that, I guess that's where you apply the knowledge and learn more. And having the template, yeah, it is in letter form, but it's a really good template for an email to be sent and to see clearly what all the information is. So you've got a lot of the information, and now we'll work in smaller groups to apply the information. So that's kind of what will be coming up. So there's going to be a working group for the caseworkers on the 2nd of March, if you can make it. And then just there's some questions from Ian about do we write letters in a collective, coordinated way, or as individuals? So in the last one, we got people who signed up for casework to assign themselves to a postcode. So I can keep that map live, and if you want to do casework, you can work on what postcode you'll be working on, preferably where you live, so that it's in your day-to-day life and you can follow up on where that is quite easily, kind of thing. So yeah, it will be coordinated in that way, where you have a postcode and you respond to that, so that we're not all like sending heaps of letters to one person. And then your other question about some of them like very close to windows, I presume that's okay if the swift nest there and if sparrows might lead to conflict. Yeah, I mean, the main problem about them being close to windows is if the swifts are disturbed by people like washing the windows or fixing things or whatever, like getting access to the windows, that might disturb the swift nest boxes. But in terms of noise, like, yeah, they're there for like 2 months. They do have screaming parties when they first arrive, but they're not totally abrasive. And I think if you lived in a city, like, the sound of swifts isn't going to be much worse than like all the cars outside on those busy roads. But it is definitely something to consider, and obviously it's still at the consent of the person who is developing the building or renovating the roof to say yes or no. If they really don't want to, then can't force them.
So, Katie, just my fear there isn't that the swifts occupy it, it would be that a noisier species such as sparrows do, because my experience with sparrows' nests is they are quite noisy.
They are really loud, yeah.
And so the issue would be then if we're trying to get developers on side and they go in and put a couple of swift box in close to windows, and then those are negatively perceived by their tenants because sparrows occupy it, those same builders are not going to put Swift boxes in the future. So it was just sort of thinking strategically that way, that if we get them put up away from where people might hear the sparrows, if the sparrows come in, then the builders are more likely to stick with us and put Swift boxes in over time.
Yeah, it's true. What I've experienced with working with Barrett's is that there's quite a disjoint between the builders and the developers. So the developers want to have the bricks in because they look really good and get more money, essentially, to be really blunt. Whereas the builders are they're just doing the job kind of thing when they're working for the developers. So I wouldn't say that we would lose builders in that sense, and the developers want it anyway because they look good. That's why I would say it. And we're just saying about Swift boxes. But yeah, no, it is a really good point, because like they could ask that as well, like, will other species not occupy it? And I guess the response would be like, well, if you have it like not right above the window, as those examples showed, then they should be far away enough that it shouldn't cause too much disturbance.
Yes.
I'd hope, John. Yeah.
Well, there are bad examples, indeed, relevant to that. One thing which I thought not worth showing, it could be worth discussion at a different time, but at Westfield Avenue, facing north, if you travel west of the railway from Haymarket, you might see it. But there are balconies on that development, boxes installed in the balconies, Swift boxes and also blue-tip boxes. An architect thinking it was a good design, but I think not very useful at all, because very close to where people will be. So yes, I endorse the point, keep it away from where people are likely to be, or causing disturbance away from windows or anything like that. Indeed, yes.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. We're going to have to move on just for time's sake. I appreciate it's a lot of information. So if we take our break now, because that was like a lot of information, I think maybe, and then we will definitely still have enough time to see everybody. The end was meant to just be working in working groups, but if we're going to meet later on anyway, then we don't need to do that. So that means that we do have enough time for everyone to get their what they've prepared shared. So yeah, just you can take a wee 5-minute break if you'd like to, and we'll meet back here at 8:20. It's okay. Get a wee cup of tea. Oh, Ian, don't worry. No, it's great to have your questions. It's just like also, oh, there is a lot to jam into one. Okay, if everybody is there, if you could come back to the screen, please. Hopefully I've not lost too many people. And the next group to go is the tree team. So when you're ready, I think it's Aaron. Yeah, you're already ready. Excellent. Already got your mic off. I need to share my screen. Okay, so we're going to hear about trees. Obviously, we know that trees eat insects. Insects are supported by trees. But we're going to hear firstly, why else do we need trees in the city? And that's going to be Aaron, if you're there, yeah.
Yep. So first of all, trees play an important role in increasing urban biodiversity, providing plants and animals with a favourable habitat, food and protection. Secondly, a mature tree can absorb up to 150 kilograms worth of CO2 per year. As a result, trees play an important role in climate change mitigation. These trees can improve air quality, making Edinburgh a healthier city to live in. According to the iTree Eco Survey of 2013 in Edinburgh, trees remove around 4,885 tonnes of carbon, worth almost £1 million from the atmosphere each year in Edinburgh, and they store around 179,000 tonnes of carbon, worth £39 million. So thirdly, large trees are also excellent filters for urban pollutants and fine particulates. They absorb polluting gases such as carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides, and filter fine particulates such as dust, dirt, or smoke out of the air by trapping them on their leaves and bark. And according to that survey that I mentioned previously, urban trees in Edinburgh delivered £1.82 million worth of ecosystem services, such as carbon capture, rainwater interception, and removal of air pollution per year. Trees also help to reduce carbon emissions by helping to conserve energy. For example, the correct placement of trees around buildings can reduce the need for winter heating bills by apparently 20 to 50%. Additionally, research shows that living in close proximity of urban green spaces and having access to them can improve physical and mental health, for example, by decreasing high blood pressure and stress. This in turn contributes to the well-being of urban communities. Additionally, planning urban landscapes with trees can increase property value by up to 20% and attract tourism and business. Additionally, mature trees can help regulate water flow and play a key role in preventing floods and reducing the risk of natural disasters. For example, urban trees intercepted 183 million litres worth of water every year in Edinburgh, equating to almost £250,000 worth of avoided costs in sewerage charges. And that's my part, yeah.
Thank you very much, Aaron. That's really great, really informative. So who we got next? Ian and Tony, I think.
That's me. Yeah. Let's see. We are particularly interested in trees as a group to provide bugs for our swifts to eat. And given that our bugs and beasties have evolved alongside our trees, we think it would make sense to go for native trees. Tony and I is the ones that we would like to see planted. This slide just shows a list. On the left, it's the trees that are listed as native, the trees of the Caledonian Forest by Trees for Life. Clearly, that's possibly a wee bit further north than us. And then the British native tree list on the left comes from the Woodland Trust. And they've included shrubs as well as trees. So there actually is quite a lot of the ones you would expect to be there are there, but there are maybe one or two interesting options as well. If we go into the next slide. This was just me throwing down a list of things we might choose to think about in deciding which trees we want to plant. So first of all, you might think about the breadth of insect species supported. The oak's always pointed out as the wonderful tree that supports the greatest number of species. And that's what this the chart on the right-hand side of the slide shows. However, breadth of species is not necessarily the only factor you'll be interested in. The sheer quantity of insects supported is also important. And I've heard some people argue that a sycamore actually contains more insects than an oak. It's just that you get fewer species. So something else for us to maybe think about. If we've got options, we might think about benefit to non-swift species as well. So birds that, trees that fruit and so on might be an option. We might, depending on the site, think about succession planting. So typically a bare hillside would get birch first and rowan and species like that, and then build up species mix over time. Depending on the sites we get to play with, that might be a factor to think about. Something about provenance. So do we trust the supplier? Are we actually getting the trees that we think we're getting? As I mentioned in the tree group last time, in London, I've been on a native tree trail and come across a labeled juniper that is clearly not a juniper. And it was something with the scientific name Juniperus, but clearly the provider, the nursery that provided it, didn't think beyond the first part. And so there was some sort of eastern cedar planted there as well. So just something to pay attention to if we do want to go with a specific type of tree, to actually have a supplier that we trust to provide us that. The site specs will matter. So if it's a damp site, we're probably moving towards willows, maybe alder, that sort of thing. I did mention the scarcity point because I'm always into, there's very few, black poplar is a native tree. There's very few of them around. And when I ever see planting, I don't know, they might be a very pernickety species that don't fancy being in Edinburgh, but they're exceptionally rare. And it seems to me, well, if we have a chance of planting something, let's tick that off as well. Anyway, despite all of this, we don't need to overthink things, because as before we move on, the last thing here is there's a lot of other groups involved in tree planting as well. And so I presume we'd be looking to dovetail and align with those rather than doing our own thing. These are all things at play, but as the next slide shows, and this was just me, this is a really dense slide. I was trying, people here will know this better than me. I was just trying to find out what do swifts actually eat. And this was what they found looking at a nest in Northern Ireland. And I was struck by this, and I know this is just one study of one nest, but just the sheer variety of things that were being eaten. And it doesn't seem that swifts are fussy eaters. And so that, I think, does give us scope to perhaps not worry too much about which particular native trees we're getting in the ground, and I'd actually err towards the more and the greater surface area and volume of biomass that we can get in there. That's providing habitat for all these things moving forward. And I just flagged aphids and midges as sort of, aphids live on every single thing in your garden. So anything that provides biomass is going to be useful for the swifts. The next slide. And this is a pet peeve of mine, and I hope I'm going against what other people will get onto, is this desire to plant trees in straight lines and regular spacing and to wrap them in plastic and then support them with a bit of dead tree when in fact we're meant to be planting trees. And so the left is Calton Hill. It's probably not a great example, but birch in particular grows up in these incredibly dense clusters. And again, if we're looking at volume of biomass to support an insect population, that's going to give us much more bang from our buck than a bunch of specimen trees planted and tended that way. Of course, the downside is your trees are unprotected, so you lose some, but if we're creating an ecosystem, that's part and parcel of the thing anyway. And then I don't know if you got the last slide in time, Katie. Just that I don't know much about this movement, but it seems really intriguing to me, this idea of tiny forests and the idea of you find small spaces, you plant them incredibly densely, and you get all sorts of benefits, both in carbon terms, but also biodiversity and so on as well. And just to flag that at some group, I know that Earthwatch have got a bit of funding to do these around the UK, and I don't know if we can coordinate or try and persuade them to do one of their projects in Edinburgh. That's it from us, unless Tony, you had something you wanted to add.
Okay, Tony, are you?
You're muted.
Yeah, got me now? Yeah.
Yeah, can hear you.
Yeah, good. No, just saying how well he'd covered everything. But this thing about diversity and what swifts actually eat, how selective they are, is quite an interesting point. And I don't know enough about it, but basically they fly along with their mouths open and help themselves to whatever's there, so that most trees are going to provide plenty of food for them. So I think we shouldn't be worried too much about the all the varieties, but just getting native trees, which are going to produce more insects, more of them in more places. That's the key thing. Yeah.
That's brilliant, Ian and Tony. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Okay, next we have a very experienced tree planter, Aaron.
Me.
No, Aaron, you're muted.
Hello.
That's all right, thanks.
There you go. There you go. Can hear you now. Take it away.
Yeah, sure. So there's quite a few different techniques. So I've tried to keep this quite general. There's quite a few different approaches and where you're planting and what your resources and aims are. So anyway, oh no.
I can still hear you.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. Oh.
Am I back?
Yeah. You're back. You're still quite quiet though.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I can hear you though. Maybe speak like a little bit loud.
Right. That's fine. I'll
Yeah.
try to speak louder.
That's perfect.
So yeah. So next slide. So the first thing that you want to do is figure out what point you're going to, where you're going to plant your tree. So obviously really boggy areas are usually quite bad. And anywhere that kind of looks like it's, you know, on top of a rock or on a steep slope is quite bad. What you can do is you can take a small soil sample to have a check if the soil looks like good quality, so you can quickly like use your spade to take a brief sample and look inside. And soil that is very like wet and clay and claggy is usually quite bad. If it has lots of shiny sandy parts in it, that's generally a better indicator. And obviously not too close to any other hazards like fences and buildings and other trees and such. Next slide. So then you want to screef, unless it has already been mounded by a machine. You want to remove the vegetation around where you're going to plant. And you generally do that by just kind of hacking at the top of it with a spade, so that there aren't that many other plants that will act as competition and overcrowd the tree. So you make a wee hole, a wee area around it. Next slide. So yeah, and then you dig the hole. That's quite vague because there's a few different types of spades. The one I've used most it's quite thin, and you kind of use it like an apple corer. You put it in the ground and then just twist it and then take a plug of soil out. Depending on your scheme, you may want to add fertilizer or some mycorrhizal mix to the bottom of the hole before you put the tree in. And that's according to whatever mix and quantity you think is right for that. You then put the tree inside, and then it should either be in like a plug form where it's grown in a container with soil, or bare root where it's just come out of the ground and it's and you place it in, and then you sprinkle soil around the hole, around the roots, and then firm them in gently. And then you would like heel them in with your shoes or try and press them in with your hands. And you don't want to bury the tree too high, because then that can leave the bark to be damaged later in life when it grows, if it's the stem is too buried. So you want it to be just above where the roots begin. And once you've firmed it in, if you give it a gentle tug to make sure it's definitely in and it's firmly placed in, then you should be good to go. And one of the most important things to do when you're handling like big bags of trees is to make sure they're covered up in whatever bag or protection that you have them in, because especially if it's windy or sunny, the roots can get dried out and then they'll die. So you really need to make sure that you're keeping most of the trees in whatever protection they've got. And when you take a tree out, you're putting it in the ground as soon as possible. Next slide. So yeah, so there's a wee bit of debate about whether to put them in these sort of like plastic covers with stakes that you normally see. The pros of doing that is it does protect them from animals and other factors, and it does lead to higher succession rate. The cons are obviously like plastic pollution. It's obviously more expensive to buy it and more effort to put them in than it would be if you didn't use them. A lot of the time they're removed too late, and then the tree sort of like grows in to the tie that's put around them is quite common a lot of the time when they're placed in parks and such. They're not removed in time. And also it can not be very good for, say, the roots, because trees will develop roots according to the wind to support them. So if you have a tree and then you have the wind blowing from this direction, the tree will feel that, and then it will grow more support on this side. But if it has a stake, it won't feel that pressure and it won't know to build its support system in that way. So when you then remove the protection, it then is a bit weaker than if it potentially hasn't had that. So there's pros and cons to doing that. Next slide. So yeah, that's what you select the site, you make sure to remove the area around the tree, you can add fertilizer, you make sure to put your tree in quickly out of the bag, you sprinkle the soil in, making sure not to leave any air bubbles, and you firm it in, and then you do a little tug test, and then you can optionally stake it and add a protector tube.
That's brilliant, Aaron. Thank you so much. Really informative. I didn't realize that about the wind. I didn't think about that with the root development. So thank you so much for that.
No
really
problem.
great things to keep in mind and a really good reference for all of us for the future. So next we have a little kind of topic that I think is very relevant to planting trees. And I'll not say any more, but Christina,
Yeah.
if you'd like to.
So, yeah, and Kathy, I'm Kathy. Yeah, there's so much to say about this book, so we're just going to rattle through some of the main points. But Peter started out as a forester in southwest Germany, and then about 20 years ago he developed a new understanding of trees. So he explains that when trees unite to create a fully functioning forest, that you can really see the whole is greater than its parts. So trees, if you can go to the next slide, please, thank you. Well, this the only other slide we have.
And then just click on the first. Yeah.
So trees are capable of forming relationships. I'm just gonna go through, we're gonna talk about some of the interesting facts that we found in the book. So relationships is the one that I'm gonna talk about. Trees can distinguish their own roots from those of other species, and they will share food with other species as well as their own. There are advantages to sharing food with their competitors, and the primary reason being for survival, which is just like in human communities as well. Sick individual trees are supported and nourished until they recover, because if they die, they will leave a gaping hole in the forest, which could let in storms and topple other trees, or too much heat, which could dry out the roots and, of course, damage them. So trees that are friends are careful right from the outset not to grow overly thick branches in each other's directions. And such partners are often so tightly connected at the roots that sometimes they even die together. On the other hand, planted forests, because their roots are irreparably damaged when they are planted, are therefore almost incapable of networking with one another. And the trees in these forests behave like loners and suffer from their isolation. Most never have the opportunity to grow old. And the other fact, mother trees shade their offspring to stop them from growing too fast. This light deprivation ensures slow growth, which scientists have discovered is a prerequisite if a tree is to live to a ripe old age.
Great, and that brings us on to our next point, which is communication, which I'll talk about now. And it was really interesting to read about all the different ways that trees can communicate. So Peter mentions quite an interesting study that happened about 40 years ago in the African savannah, where giraffes were just grazing on these umbrella thorn acacias, but they quickly moved on. And scientists discovered that trees were responding to the way in which they were being eaten by these giraffes. So they started to pump out toxic substances into their leaves, and they also at the same time gave out sort of strong smells to warn the other trees in their community of these predators. So this sort of communication also happens in forests here in Europe. And beeches, spruce and oaks, he says, register pain as soon as something starts nibbling on them. And they also, the tissues in the leaf send out electrical signals, much like human tissue does, albeit a lot slower, sorry. And they're also able to match the saliva from certain insects to the insects themselves, and then produce specific compounds that they send out in the air that will attract predators to come and eat those insects. So I thought that was really a really interesting way in which they can communicate with sort of the animal world. And then importantly, we need to kind of look below the ground. I'll just add one more thing here about communication and the relationship that trees' roots have with fungus and fungi. And what scientists are discovering is that a single fungus can actually cover miles of underground space, and they can sort of network an entire forest. And fungal connections transmit signals from one tree to the other, helping them exchange news about insects, drought, and other dangers. So they're really vital to the survival of trees. And this is something I'll come on now to vulnerability, their vulnerability. So trees, especially in cities, will lack these fungal kind of connections. And I think what he says is that it's important that trees don't grow on their own, because the relationships they have with their elders, so younger trees, you know, they learn a lot from their parents about growing slowly and, you know, not growing too quickly, especially at the start, because that can use up a lot of energy. And then if they then don't have enough access to water, which apparently a lot of trees that grow in parks, you know, the soil isn't as loose and fertile as it would be in an old growth forest. So they can't access as much water. And then if they grow too quickly at the start, then they're more prone to getting fungal diseases because their cells are bigger and things. So yeah, there's a lot of information, but yeah, there's really interesting points. And one more thing about vulnerability, and I guess young trees, is that often before they're planted, their roots have been trimmed a bit, and they can, by doing that, it's taking away essential kind of brain-like structures that they have, and this means that they can't really orientate themselves well in the ground, so it restricts their ability to find food and water. And yeah, I guess in cities, you know, the ground is really compacted, especially kind of next to roads and things like that, and often there's pipes and things under the pavement. So again, this is kind of restricting trees' chances of really putting down their roots. And another thing is that, yeah, they're going to be more exposed to harsher elements in cities, like, you know, really hot weather, or he mentioned something about the salt that gets put down on the roads, you know, especially in winter, when that's thrown up into the air and goes onto the leaves of the trees, it can actually burn their leaves. But, you know, so I think the main message I took away from that was that it's really important that, you know, about like what Ian said about creating pocket forests and allowing trees to kind of grow together in a community. I think pretty important, as opposed to planting them kind of separately along, along streets. But he does mention that there's a few species that grow quite happily on their own, and that's like the quaking aspen and the silver birch. Yeah, and they've kind of managed to produce their own defensive mechanisms. So yeah, they can kind of survive better on their own. But yeah, there's just a few kind of interesting facts we took away there from the book. And we definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it.
Thanks very much, Christina. And sorry, I've forgotten your mum's name again.
Kathy.
Kathy, yeah. Kathy, yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on, we are really tight for time. So if you could just keep to the 2 minutes. I really regret saying that because you're all saying really interesting things, and I'm finding it very relevant in terms of swifts eating insects and needing to grow on trees and that kind of thing. So hopefully the rest of the group will be able to keep on time. So I think we've got Morris, Natalie, and Ian.
Greg.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'll start. Yeah, we'll be pretty brief. So we'll be discussing the location and the practicalities of planting trees. We've had really good conversations and feedback from the last couple of meetings where people have mentioned all the different friends of groups that we have in Edinburgh, which is fantastic. Even if you're just walking a local park, there's quite often a notice board as well that I've got contact details. And actually, I did a little search on the Edinburgh Council website, and they have a little search engine you can use to find contact details. Might be a bit painstaking as well. You've got to obviously find the park and then find the details, but it's a good place to start. And they'll have hopefully good advice as well about planting in their parks, because hopefully they've done that before. Other organisations which may have locations, we've got the Natural Heritage Service. I know the Water of Leith Conservation Trust, they're out quite regularly planting trees along the Water of Leith and looking after the area, so that's really important as well. National Trust for Scotland, and again, these other places might be able to help with our Swift box locations as well, the ones that we are going to build ourselves. Private gardens as well, especially I was thinking in the new town as well, you've got these large areas, these private gardens that are shared by the local community, just off Queen Street, places like that. They would be maybe a good point to start as well. They've got quite very large areas to use. From a personal point as well, schools, I'm a teacher in a school as well, so we've definitely got large enough grounds that are quite bare with trees actually, not too many trees in our school grounds, but we've definitely got areas, so that's worth exploring. I know there's a lot of schools in the city that have got really good green spaces that would be definitely willing, and you've got all the kind of the hard workers as well, the school kids, that can help out. I've been up to Comrie before and took part in an initiative planting trees. And they would be definitely happy, especially at the moment as well, where maybe volunteers can't come into the schools. So definitely teachers would be willing to take that on, I'd imagine, especially coming up the next couple of months. But obviously all this, we need kind of guidance from the different authorities and the legality of planting. So I can look into it as well from my point of view, from the teachers, but I think at the moment they've got enough on their plate as well, the schools. But eventually, hopefully, we'll get back into these really good resources and find out if we can use the land to plant the trees. I think Morris is going to take over the next slide.
Hello. Yeah, so I'll just be covering. We've got a few ideas in terms of where we get the tools and the trees that we'd need to do this planting. We've got possible tree sources in the Woodland Trust, TCV, the Conservation Volunteers. Well, I have heard that we may have issues getting that before autumn, but I'm not sure. We'd need to double check that. Alba Trees was also mentioned. It's not an organisation I'm familiar with though. In terms of tools, we've got a few places that we've already covered in some of Katie's talks, like the Edinburgh Tool Library and Three Hares Woodland, possibly. I had a quick chat to one of the guys from the Water of Leith Trust as well, and they would be happy to lend out tools if we're in the area, as long as they don't need them that day. They don't have planting spears, I think it was, but they've got shovels and things, so they'd be happy for us to borrow them as long as, you know, we're careful, I guess. But yeah, I'm gonna pass on. That's the rest. That's my slide all finished.
Hi. Yeah, just to reiterate what Greg and Morris have been saying. So talking about the people that could help, obviously we've got this lovely group of volunteers here in the Swift group, and just considering other groups in Edinburgh who may be seeking kind of voluntary something, and particularly thinking about youth groups such as Guides and Scouts, perhaps the Boys Brigade and other conservation groups amongst young people. So I think that would be useful groups to target. Yeah, Greg already mentioned about using the school pupils on sites, and we thought about talking to gardeners and landscapers. But I think the key point that we need to consider, while COVID restrictions remain, then we are obviously going to have restrictions in what we can do in a voluntary capacity. So just targeting the right groups and those that can work together at the moment would be good. That's all.
Thank you very much. So obviously with yeah, like what you've just said, Natalie, with COVID restrictions, we can't do anything right now, but having all this information means that as soon as we can go. And I've just heard back from the project coordinator of the 1 million tree city of Edinburgh, and he's really excited that there's capacity for us to plant trees like before the Swifts come back and that kind of thing. So when it's possible, we can really like initiate it to happen. But obviously at the minute we can't. And then just want to hear really briefly from Claudia, and who was the other person with Claudia?
There's also Grant.
Yeah. Okay, and just if you could keep it as brief as possible. Sorry to cut you out when everybody else has had so much time. That's really poor facilitation on my part, so apologies.
No worries.
It's 9 minutes to 9, so if you do need to leave at 9, then you're welcome to. You can catch up later. For the creative group, if you are able to stay till 10 past, if that's okay, maximum. So yeah, Claudia.
Okay, so let's have a look at the Edinburgh tree map. Next. Okay, so as per screenshot, the Edinburgh tree map shows where you can find the trees in the city of Edinburgh. And this is a project that is born from collaboration of data and spatial scientists from Centre of Ecology and Anthropology and University of Edinburgh. And as you can see, there's also a link, as this map is freely available online. Next. So on these maps, you can see that the trees are represented by small dots and they have different colors that are matching the species as is shown on the map legend. This map has a useful feature that allows you to filter the tree species by clicking the name on the legend. In the next slide, there's just a quick demonstration of how this works. So in this case, we just want to, for example, filter out all the trees to visualize sycamore. Next. So the map also allows you to choose whether you want to visualize only the trees and the street names with a black backdrop, or if you want to visualize the trees and the city with aerial photos. But Kathy, if you click, it will show you how it looks different with the aerial. Okay, next. And additionally, if you click on one of the dots that represent the trees, there will be a pop-up window that appears with more information that shows age, scientific name, and etc. And this pop-up windows also allows you to generate a link that can be used if you want to share the tree location with other people. Next. Okay, this is just showing what you will see when you share it. Okay, so just to wrap this up, this map is a good starting point to know where certain tree species are found in Edinburgh. However, there are a few issues. First of all, it doesn't seem to be extremely up to date, as most data is from 2016. Then it is difficult to say if it's reliable, as there are no pictures for the trees. A possible solution would be to double check the tree species with Google Street View. Additionally, the map doesn't include every single tree, as you will find yourself by looking at aerial photos of the city, so it's not extremely comprehensive. And finally, as there are no facts and figures available, we cannot tell if some species are overrepresented on the map or in what proportion they are to each other. But however, as this map is far from being a final product, we might still expect to see new features and improvement in the future. Okay, and now Grant, in the next slide, he will talk about an area with high tree density.
Yeah, hi there. Just as an example of an area with high tree density, I'd selected Inverleith Park. And you can see a little excerpt from the map that shows how many coloured dots there are on there. Just to echo what Claudia said, people who know the area will know that the Botanic Gardens is just to the right of on that map of Inverleith Park, but actually there aren't any dots populated there, so it's definitely not complete. Whilst Inverleith Park has got a high number of trees, they are, as you can see, very much just aligned in avenues, mainly because the use of the park is as playing fields. But I think there probably still is opportunity to increase the density of planting, potentially along those avenues or widen the avenues, and also maybe with hedgerows around the perimeter. Although I would think that hedgerows would have maintenance costs associated with them. I think other people have already mentioned that it'd be good to align that with the development plans that there are for parks and the diversity plan. I think the only other thing I'd spotted is that I'm not convinced that the species are all correct. So I'm not a tree expert, but I'm not convinced that the avenue I've got the photo of there actually are turkey oaks. I always thought they were lime trees, but I'm sure there are other people who know better than me. And that was it from me on that.
And I'll just talk very briefly about an area of low tree density that I spotted on the map, and it's Holyrood Park, which is one of the main landmarks in the city of Edinburgh. So what is interesting about Holyrood Park is that I asked to myself, has it always been forested? And the answer is actually, has it always been like that, or was there forest there at some point? And the answer is yes. There used to be trees and wet areas, but these natural resources were overused by people throughout the century, most notably where Holyrood Park became first a deer hunting estate for the royals in the 12th century, and then when sheep grazing took over in the 16th century. Then at the end of the 70s, when sheep grazing stopped, some trees were replanted by people and other trees naturally recolonized the park. And if possible, more tree planting could definitely help the natural regeneration process to rewild Holyrood Park to its former state. Yeah, that's me.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, the whole tree team. Obviously, we don't have much time for questions. But for the next steps for the tree team, we obviously can't do our plan, as we mentioned. So you have two options: either to join the Casework working group, where you can write rejections to trees being cut down, with all of the wealth of knowledge you've just given, or you can join the creativity and social media team. Or you can join neither and just join in to the next Swift local group meeting, which will be making the nest box. So that's your next steps. And again, yeah, thank you so much for all the work that you put in. Graham, if you could just we're not having a Graham. Sorry, social media team, I'll come back to you. There's somebody, Graham needs to leave. So I'm just jumping ahead to his slides. Oh, you don't have slides, okay. Can you just summarize what you're doing, Graham?
So Nick first.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, we don't have slides. So our subject was to make a video about what maybe elderly people had to say about the state of Swifts or nature. So we decided to do maybe a very short video of 1 minute that would be played on social medias about one question that we would ask to
different types of elderly people about what they would think the nature looked like. Oh, sorry, it's wrongly phrased. How the nature would look like for them if we didn't make anything into it. And so the plan would be to make a video with different answers, and I'll let Graham go into the details.
Yeah, so we were thinking about what a vision of untouched nature would be for the older generation, and then we could explore at another point what the younger generation that would be and see the differences. But there's a couple of ways which we could present it. One could be very simple, and it's just COVID restrictions filmed on phones by relatives. And there's something quite nice and sort of chilled about direct generational way, and have the words of people from the older generation with pictures from like young kids which are inspired by their words, so they get to draw what they hear from the words that the older people say, and those are the visuals in the video. And then we could maybe even add some animation on top of that, having little stick figures exploring this sort of this vision of wildness. So either could work, and we'd probably explore both.
Cool. Thank you so much, both of you. That's really great. So yeah, that's to tie in to the idea of like intergenerational amnesia of nature being lost so much that our baseline understanding of what nature is completely different to 100 years ago. So their task was to try and combat that, and some really good ideas. And for the next working group, the creative team and the social media team will work together about communicating these ideas. So just gonna, okay, great. We're gonna hear from the rest of the creative team, and then we'll come back to social media. So this, I was saying to somebody earlier, but like I'm so not like able to do art that whenever I see something like this, I feel like somebody's just created magic. So I think this is wonderful. So whoever, Sonia, I think was it that made it?
Yeah, so I kind of just tried to come up with some ideas for like what to put on like posters on notice boards or something. So this was one of the ideas, which is like a circular design, and you can put information about what the Swifts are doing or what we should be doing on like each of the quadrants, and kind of try and organize it in that way and make it like it's a cycle, you keep going, it happens every year, that kind of thing. And like with all of this, I really want like feedback and any other ideas that you have, like that would be really great. So the next one. So this was like another idea I had for like a design to kind of show that they leave and they come back. And Leslie, the other person on my team, came up with these lovely descriptions of like what they're doing, and then at the same time, if you go to the next slide, what we can do as well at the same time as they go about what they're doing. So that's
wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's really beautiful, and again, we'll work on it more in the working group. So I think it's perfect. I wouldn't say anything to change it. Okay, and then the final creative team.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear us?
Oh.
Yeah, can hear you.
Great. Mike, do you want to take the first part and I'll take the second?
No problem. Yeah, the first thing we were looking at were Swiss street signs, which we sort of fit on the idea of stickers, probably about sort of beer mat sized, sort of coaster sized stickers, to be placed on street lamps or posts or near to where swifts are active or nesting, to really just draw attention of people to the swifts, and encourage them to look up really and engage with what was going on. So we thought, yeah, they had to be sort of quite simple, eye-catching, and with a very clear message. We sort of optional additions will be maybe adding some brief bit of text, something like look up, with the idea of a QR code. We kind of thought would be a really good one, perhaps linking in with the media team. So you could scan the QR code and that would provide you with a link to the Swift group and some information about Swifts. And yeah, sort of an arrow pointing up. So if we could link it in with the Swift Nest site, just sort of pointing out where the Swifts were. Yeah, we'll go on to the next slide. So here's a few sort of possible sticker designs we came up with, and we sort of based it around the sort of hotspot design, because we thought that people would already recognize that, and it's naturally very eye-catching. So yeah, there's a few different very similar designs there, but slightly different size logos and coloration. So we've got to go on to the next one.
So the next task we were working on was coming up with a mask making workshop that we could run in local schools to engage school children with Swifts. We thought mask making would be great because it's a thing that you can do in class with all your classmates, but you can also do it at home and online. The great thing about masks is they let you become a character, so you can explore why Swifts are important and why they're great and all the things that they do during their lives while running about as a Swift, which is a great way to get people involved, is to get them to actually participate. Now, Swifts have, I love Swifts' faces, but they're not particularly exciting compared to, say, a toucan, whatever. So we decided to try and think of ways to create variety by using colors and textures. And if we go on to the next slide, we decided that we could try and create templates so that kids could print them out at home or in class. So you can cut out the template and then color it any way you'd like to make it more exciting. We thought of different designs, maybe a Swift's face or like a full face mask, but also the idea of maybe having actual whole Swifts that you could put on, say, dealy boppers or a headband or floating around your head, just so that you could have a whole swarm of them. If we were doing this in person, we would hope to be providing materials, and that would give us the opportunity to also use non-plastic materials. So moving away from like glitter and PVA glue and more towards twigs and masking tape and leaves, and creating, sort of more temporary masks for sure, but more engaging with the natural environment in a really tangible way. We could maybe combine this with, say, a story time session about a Swift learning to fly from the nest and going on its migration and coming back and all of the amazing things it sees and eats and talks to on the way. And if we could go to the next slide. These were some templates that Mike could come up with, and these show an entire Swift. And if you go to the next slide, you will see Mike's niece road testing them for us. Excellent quality control there. And I think that's us.
Yeah. Oh, this is so wonderful. This made me smile so much. Good job. Wonderful. Yeah, really like what you say. And as I said before, we will work on all of these things. So for the creative group and social media, if you put Wednesday the 3rd of March in your diaries as a potential day for a working group, well, that's the day, and just if you can't make it, then you can catch up outside of that. And yeah, so, and if you've been in the tree group, if you want to join that group, social media and creativity based on all these ideas, then you're welcome to, or if you want to join the casework, you can do that as well. So just going really briefly back to the social media team, and that's the final thing, and thank you so much for your patience. So Kate and Bethany.
Bethany, are you there?
Yeah.
Do you want to do a quick talk through the slide and I can add in some more information?
Yeah,
as
sure.
well?
So we've created 3 social media accounts for the group. We've got an Instagram group, an Instagram page, a Facebook page, and a Twitter page. And if you want to give them a follow, the account names are there. Yeah, they should be quite easy to remember. Just Edinburgh Swifts. Also, if you have any pictures of Swifts or the logo that was used before, that would be really great if we could use that like circular thing as a logo, because that was it was beautiful. I think that would look really nice, the profile picture. But also if you've got pictures of maybe Swift next boxes that you've made, or just pictures of Swifts which you'd like us to share on social media, that would be great. And you can send us an email or edinburghswiftlocalgroup@gmail.com with any pictures or anything you'd like us to share. And another thing, we're looking for ideas for maybe like group hashtags, so we can make sure that everything like we share goes in one places. And yeah, Kate's posting the link to a Jamboard for like ideas. And yeah, we're looking for an idea for a bio. One idea I had was working together to make Edinburgh a better place for Swifts, just to sort of like summarise the group. But if anyone thinks of anything better or has any other ideas, just let us know.
Yeah, I've posted in some questions onto the Jamboard just to kind of prompt a bit of thinking. What do you want people to know about our group? I think is probably the key part of that. We currently just have Edinburgh Swift local group as a description, but it would be nice to add a little bit more to that. So yeah, if you do have any suggestions, the Jamboard will be up for at least another week. Bethany and I are having a catch up on Friday to discuss some more strategies. But yeah, if you've got any ideas or things, if you're an absolute wordsmith, which I'm most definitely not, yeah, please add in some descriptions or some funny puns or descriptions. That would be awesome. And that's us.
Also, I think it's National Nest Box Week this week. So if anyone has pictures of nest boxes or things that we can share on social media, that would be great.
It's Tony's chance now. I'll get him to send you a picture.
Yes, please.
He's gone. I think he's gone. Brilliant. Okay. So yeah, and the point of doing the social media is that yeah, you just have a bit more autonomy kind of thing with the group, and can share things more easily, and it will help with doing a kind of creative competition and that kind of thing. So yeah, to follow it on all the various platforms would be really great, and share it and that type of thing, help us reach more people about the Swifts. So yeah, the 2 dates to keep in mind are the Tuesday the 2nd of March or Wednesday the 3rd of March, depending on what group you're in. And then just finally briefly, the next meeting will be Tuesday the 16th of March. So we've got like a working group in 2 weeks, and then an actual Swift local group meeting in another month, so next month in the middle of the month. That will be a little bit of feedback on what you've been up to, and then building an S-box in a workshop. As I said, you'll be given a video before of what you need to prepare. If you don't want to make an S-box, or you can't get all the tools together and that kind of thing, you're welcome to still come and watch, but you don't have to. And yeah, we'll just keep the working groups rolling in between times. The Swifts will start to move north in the next couple of months. So yeah, it's all getting very exciting. And sorry for those. So yeah, I didn't facilitate that very well, but thank you so much for all your input. It was like a huge wealth of knowledge and skills and experience. So really wonderful to have such a great team. And thank you for your time. Yeah, I can answer questions outside of this, so you're welcome to go now. Yeah,
thank you everyone.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, everyone. Amazing presentations, loads of knowledge. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.